Value Impulses, the podcast for potential development. By and with Uli Vogel. Dear listeners, I'm looking forward to episode 11. It's great to have you with us. In the previous episode, episode 10, I discussed the importance of ethics in companies, looking at how they can, ultimately use it to move forward. And today in episode 11, my title is Change of Perspective 1, Why the Application Process Must be Revolutionized. This will be followed by episode 12, Change of Perspective 2, How you can actually do that, also supported by profiling values. How do I start? I'd like to take a meta-perspective and reach back into history a bit. Yes, what values prevailed in the employer-employee relationship? To really go back hundreds of years, what was it like? Yes. What was the application process like, if we even know that exactly anymore? So, what was the employer-employee relationship like? Let's look back at the Middle Ages with the craft guilds. You sort of grew into it, very often father to son and so on. There were very precise hierarchical structures, of course, and regulations, and it was relatively strictly, governed. Yes, there was poverty in the countryside with agriculture, but also often in the cities, and people were very happy, if they were accepted into these guilds. They were all small workshops. There was no talk of industry yet. And what did the rest of society do? Well, we still had the military, of course, yes, and naturally the clergy, all the monasteries. From the 13th or 14th century, universities north of the Alps, so the intellectual elite, developed. And yes, there were some free trades too, of course, and showmen and barbers or traveling doctors and so on. But when you take it all together, there were far more people who wanted to earn a living, yes, than there were actual opportunities and jobs. So it was always clear that you had to be very glad to get an opportunity somewhere, to earn your living, to get trained, to acquire, yes, competence, you could say quite simply. And there are also great novels from those times like The Physician, which I remember well. And whenever you look at these things, the historical novels and so on, you'll find that, yes, the employer, the company, the master, whoever, the professor, the bishop, they were the powerful ones, and those who wanted to enter service, they were the poor ones, of whom there were many, and that's why it was an employer's market, clearly. Exactly, clearly, yes. And that continued in early capitalism during industrialization, of course. In England, there was actually something quite cruel, I'd say, called the chimney boys, as they were known. So, in the chemical industry, they used a lot of smokestacks, and those were fired from below with chemicals, and naturally, they had to be cleaned at some point. And it was hardly possible to clean them with, tools, because they were also quite tall, of course. And so they actually picked boys, young lads, boys, or offered them the chance to slide down into these stacks from the top, wearing special pants to catch the soot in order to clean them. And of course, they were poisoned in the process and their life expectancy wasn't very long after that, right? And we're also familiar with Manchester capitalism, which basically says, yes, here's labor, capital, where people were actually exploited to the bone. So, an employer's market, let's say, in its most brutal form, that's really the only way to put it. And at the end of the 19th century, or rather, the 19th century, there was social legislation under Bismarck, who actually recognized the explosive potential of the exploited working class. Socialists emerged back then, social democracy too, onto the political market, if you can call it that. There were also the anti-socialist laws, which tried to curb the movement. But Bismarck realized this and introduced health insurance and accident insurance. Yes, in 1883-84. Back then, these AOKs, the General Local Health Insurance Funds, were founded, as were the professional associations and, later on, pension insurance and the like. Right. So they tried to contain it because it simply, led to the possibility of society falling apart and political systems being overthrown. Well, and that continued into the 20th century. How? How was it then between employee and employer? Well, there was the First World War, and then Marxism-Leninism paved its way. Yes, Marx's Capital is a very famous work and ultimately resulted in 70 years of communism in many parts of the world. Yes, where you basically dissolve the distinction between employee and employer. Every incentive to be truly entrepreneurial was intentionally removed, and people ran a planned economy that obviously didn't work at all, and ultimately it was because of relationships that bypassed the official ones. Systems, everything ran, and, well, you'd think that after communism, people might have become a bit more socially minded, but it was quite interesting to see when communism imploded, so to speak, in the late 80s and early 90s, that what followed was like a predatory capitalism, if you look at Russia, where the oligarchs came from, and also in other Eastern European countries. The people there were actually less socially inclined afterwards than they were before. So communism really didn't achieve what it might have originally intended, and it had also become totally degenerate in some ways. But if we look at the Weimar Republic, it was of course already like that with economic crises, hyperinflation, everything that was going on, and well, the weakness of that republic, of democracy. Sometimes it reminds me of what's happening right now in these years. It was of course linked to insane unemployment, and thus again a complete employer's market, impoverishment of the working class, the employees. And of course, that also paved the way for National Socialism from an economic standpoint, and... Well, it probably wasn't Hitler who came up with the idea to build the Autobahns, but a few people likely advised him on it. But clearly, he did create employment with that, of course, but... The whole thing naturally ended in a terrible fiasco, which is one of the darkest chapters not only of German history, but probably of human history, and then came the post-war period, and we were lucky that the West invested in us, in Germany too, and the economic miracle took hold relatively quickly. In the 50s and 60s, and for the first time there was actually an employees' market. So labor was suddenly scarce here and things moved forward accordingly, and well, they looked for where the people would come from. And that was the guest worker movement then. They came from Turkey, from Spain, from Portugal and so on, and today I've been living in Spain for 10 years now. Reports stating when it started with the Spaniards who then went to Germany, and I also remember well from the 70s as a personal story. My parents are pharmacists, and back then I was a little boy and I often heard at home, "Man, we can't get any employees anymore. Nobody wants to work on Saturdays anymore. They don't want to work much at all anymore. They go here and there. They're no longer reliable, right?" It was also an employees' market, and then we had the 80s and 90s. I already said it in another episode, Milton Friedman, neoliberalism, we had an employer's market again. I can remember in the early 90s there were 3, 4, sometimes 600 applications for engineering positions. Applications. And that was, of course, very, very tough and led to, well, with neoliberalism, a total focus on shareholder value, meaning a kind of predatory capitalism developed, where it's only about maximizing profit, and even when the company is profitable, people are still laid off just to increase the profit even more, which naturally led to a massive loss of trust. And then came the 2000s, the dot-com bubble. I remember, I hadn't been in the private sector for very long then. Suddenly we had a huge crisis, in 2002, ultimately, and it was difficult to find jobs again. Before that, we already had, also, at the end of the 90s, an employees market, and it was hard to find people. And then there were the crises of 2008 and 2013. Take Spain, for example, because I know it quite well. Germany was relatively unaffected by comparison. So the Lehman Brothers, crisis back in 2008, and then the debt crisis in 2013. Spain was hit much, much harder, and Southern Europe in general. Still, there's been a creeping shortage of skilled workers, basically since the late 90s. Back then, my managing director at the consultancy already said the war for talent, is coming, and it's going to get worse. Right. And if we look at it today, right, we see the reasons that are further compounding this labor shortage and, of course, the shortage of skilled workers, even more. That's basically how you could put it. Yes, we have all the baby boomers who are retiring now, already, and in the coming years, and basically an aging population in our social structure as the background. Maybe a quick figure. Currently in Germany, we have 45 million people in the labor market, and in just under 10 years, there will be about 7 million fewer. So that's obviously a huge reason why we say that the labor shortage is going to get much worse. And then, of course, we've created situations, I'll say, at least in my political opinion, the citizens' benefit and other social benefits, and the bloating of the welfare state is, in my view, no solution at all. Yes, because ultimately it has to be funded, and then everyone's pockets are picked. We are world leaders when it comes to social benefits. And it's now the case, there are calculations, right, for a family with 2 children and so on. Whether I work for minimum wage now or receive citizens' benefit with all the supplements, housing allowance on one side or the other, there's only an €800 difference, so roughly 3,200 to 2,400. So people say to themselves, well, come on, why should I do a normal job? I'll take the basic income and see if I can earn a little extra under the table. I'd be stupid not to. And yes, we also have a certain sense of entitlement, and often a lower willingness to perform. And yes, I'm also of the opinion that we have a certain decadence in, society now. But, let's not complain, let's just do it. So let's take a look. How, can this, how can the facts lead to the revolution in the job market and the application process? So if we look at history, that's where I'm coming from. Companies have never had to apply like this before. But is that so wrong? I mean, as Hartman says, companies are there for people and not people for companies. Can't we see this as an opportunity? I believe it's a huge opportunity for small and medium-sized businesses. Back in the 1940s and 50s, there were the so-called Hawthorne experiments in the United States. It was about trying to find out what happens to people if you, for example, shorten their break times, then maybe lengthen them again, give them harder work, then maybe give them bonuses and so on. And it turned out that no matter what you did, actually, people always improved in their performance. Why? Because ultimately, the focus was on these people. They took each group, these people, and explained this or that measure to them, but in a way that addressed them personally and humanly. And that's ultimately the key, to have the focus on, the people in the company. Yes, maybe even leading to, in quotes, a family-like bond, or as the Boston Consulting Group recently put it nicely, considerateness in leadership is totally important so that employees feel considered, that they're not just a number. And if we start there, then I say, who wins? The companies that discover and select the right people and then motivate them intrinsically and develop them optimally. And by the way, I really believe there are enough people, enough pools, let's say, in society, where you can fish for people, ponds so to speak in a figurative sense, who are willing to perform, but maybe don't, meet the educational requirements, or maybe just, haven't even, gotten far enough to enter this job market, or maybe even dare to apply. And that's why training and further education on the fly, I think, is the most important thing. We have to find the people who are willing to perform, who are eager to learn. And there are certainly still enough of them in society. And I'll say it bluntly, the companies that don't change, that haven't understood this revolution in the application process, people will run away from them in droves in the end. So, what solutions do I have for the application process? Well, we obviously can't just coddle people from every angle and tell them they're the best, that we only want them and no one else. Actually, I heard something quite bizarre recently. An applicant was asked why they were no longer interested in the position, and they actually said, "Well, dear interviewer, you lost me with that one question." Well, if people put themselves on a pedestal like that, then they're just not the right fit. Yeah, as I said, you have to fish in the right pools. The company needs to think strategically now, taking on the role of the applicant. It's about companies realizing, okay, we're the ones applying here, we are the applicants. How do we handle this now? And, don't go promising the moon and the stars. It's all sunshine when we're recruiting, but then it's pure hell once they actually start. As Churchill once said, there's nothing worse than raising high expectations only to have them quickly dashed. So companies have to ask themselves, just like individuals do. I've discussed this in other episodes, like when we talked about accountability in episode 9. Who am I? What am I? What do I stand for? Companies need to ask that too. What do I stand for as a business? What is my purpose? What value do I provide, and for whom? And what am I, exactly? Meaning, what is actually being done there? And who am I? What's my DNA as a company? What are our values? And how do we want to get things done? Once I know our corporate values, I can look for people who share them, and then it's a good match. I like to say that these days, the job interview is reversed. The applicant isn't the one being interviewed anymore. You could actually see it the other way around now. It's more of a business meeting between equals. I'm still waiting for the day HR people become field agents and visit candidates at home to pitch the company to them. So the applicant doesn't go to the company. HR has a sales force that goes to the applicant. Solutions are also effective when you use methods like diagnostic tools. If these are clearly explained beforehand, the applicant knows what's in it for them. Hey, I'll get some feedback. Hey, I can improve myself, and you can involve the team, as I mentioned in a previous episode. Trial shifts, for example. Regarding solutions for the hiring process, I'd like to mention my esteemed business partner, Michael Rasdorfer, who recently released an ebook on 10 fatal recruiting mistakes. That's how it's put, and it's quite short and nice to read, but very important. Right. You really have to put yourself in the shoes of the target group regarding the communication. Develop empathy. You just can't be slow in processes like these, and many don't develop a real interest or any bond with the candidates. No wonder that they then simply don't have any success either. So a lot is changing now. Yes, it's really turning upside down, but that's an opportunity and not a problem that one should complain about. The companies have it in their hands, otherwise people will run away in droves. I'll say it again, and already now, in so many companies, the missing people are exactly the factor, of no longer being able to produce. We have 2 million job openings in Germany. So I think, everything has really become clear now why we have to tackle the revolution here, and therefore in the next episode profiling values in the revolutionized application process. Thank you for your valuable time. See you soon.